Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Belton here. Today I'm going to show you guys how to craft rings, specifically triple flat damage prefix rings. Typically that's either going to be on one of three bases. That's a penumbra, a breach, and in some occasions a dusk ring. Each one has an advantage. Breach rings allow for 40 quality as opposed to your traditional 20 quality, meaning that the three prefixes you do choose will be stronger. A dusk ring has 4 prefixes and 2 suffixes, meaning you can roll all 4 flat damage types, and a penumbra ring allows for 5 prefixes and 1 suffix, meaning that you can get, the 4 flat damage ones plus, say, accuracy or lightning damage percentage or life or mana or whatever it is you're looking for there. And there's a series of benefits and drawbacks to each one. I'm going to show you guys now what I do to properly craft these. Probably the question I get asked, maybe not most often, but with respect to specific crafts, certainly one that has a high interest. And given the meta currently and what builds people are playing, certainly something that's pertinent and on topic. Now, aside from personal use case, this is also an incredibly lucrative profit strategy at pretty much every stage. So you don't need to take something to its summation, meaning you don't have to have all 6 modifiers filled out. In fact, I'm going to show you guys how to profit at each stage of the craft and what to do at each one of those stages, what I do, and where those possible margins exist, as well as some exit strategies and sort of contingencies that are vectors for profit. So the sort of 8 kind of talking points we'll have here is what ring base to pick, just kind of went over that, what item level to craft on, what mod to fracture, how to set up the fracture, what mod to get second and why, what mod to get third and why, any contingencies, and then exit strategies, pricing structure, and important overlooked parts. For myself personally, over the past week or two, I would say that these rings account for, in terms of volume, so the amounts of sales or whispers I get, about half of them. And I would say just a bit over half in terms of weighted sales, so accounting for the price of them as well. I would put a rough estimate to around the 500 divines a day stage of in terms of how much I'm selling a day of these rings. Now, keep in mind, I do this for hours and hours and hours every day, and it's not, if you're going to replicate this, you're very likely you're going to make that many. I'm talking about, I probably sell 20 rings a day sort of thing. And I have, thousands of divines worth of crafts in backlog. However, the profits on these are great. And like most crafts, it's a simple EV or expected value calculation if you do this properly. And in that sense, you can quantify pretty much every action you take. And so if you're interested in learning some profit crafting or how to make one of these rings for personal use properly, then this is your video. Before we jump in any further, I just wanted to reminder for you guys that I'm now going to be streaming on YouTube as well. And so if you ever want to catch any of these live streams, they will be on YouTube. And as well, you will be able to see the VODs. Unfortunately, I won't be able to play music on streams like I did on Twitch. But you can see the access and watch me do this live as well, as I always stream while I'm playing. If you're new and you enjoy that kind of stuff, if you could consider subscribing, leaving a like and comment and all that other YouTube fun stuff, that'd be dope. And with that being said, let's jump into her, boys. Now, the first thing, as I said, is to determine the base you want to use. Again, that's really going to fall down to one of 3 bases. A penumbra ring, which you can see here, has the implicit +2 prefix, -2 suffix. Breach ring, which has the implicit max quality is 40, and then dusk ring. I don't actually have one here, but a dusk ring is just -1 suffix +1 prefix. So it's 5, 1, 4, 2, and then 3, 3, but with 40 quality. For the flat damage types, of course, there's only 4 options. You've got fizz, fire, lightning, and cold. And for many builds, especially those using something like Tangled Tongue that has basically 0 flat damage on it, or other base types, especially if they're unique, where there is a lack of raw damage on the weapon, getting these flat damages, it can be really great, especially because a lot of the new skill gems, attack-based ones, have very high damage multipliers on them. Now, this is something in the first iteration of early access that was largely taken care of pretty much universally by Howa gloves, but because they nerfed those, the other sources of them are increasingly important, and rings are certainly a major source of those, probably the highest one for many builds. in particular, because if you make one perfect ring, you can always use Calandra's Touch to double the value of that perfect ring. And then you can also use Ingenuity, which then further multiplies the value there, plus the quality. And if you're playing the Huntress, that also has, the additional ring. Is it Huntress? One of the, I forget which ascendancy it is, but one of them has an additional ring slot too. And so there's lots of ways in which rings are great. Furthermore, this is also a craft that is sort of cross-applicable. So you touch a lot of bases here. Essentially, your market potential is quite wide because it's not something like a spear where obviously, it's going to be targeted just towards a spear. And like if you put accuracy on the spear, that's only going to be towards an Amazon, right? A flat damage ring can basically apply to any build that is attack based. And because there's some universality there, it just gives you a much larger market, which makes the sale side of these very liquid. And because of certain knowledge asymmetries that I'm going to share with you guys today, how to navigate, there is a huge potential for profit on these because so many people are interested in them, and so few people know how to do it properly or are aware of some of these sort of tiny nuances that can make a massive difference. There's in a knowledge-based game like PoE, a knowledge asymmetry always has an impact on the market, and that impact on the market tends to lay in your favor if you are a holder of said knowledge. So that's what we'll be working on today. So the first thing that we wanted to discuss there, after discussing the base, is what item level to craft on. Now, with this is very important. A lot of people ignore this. The maximum item level is not always the best item level. You want to maximize the point of utility to minimize the potential fail case scenarios and maximize your chances for success. And so in every crafting to me definitionally is the process. There's intentionality into it, right? So you should be reverse engineering your crafts. But to wit, what I mean with that is that you should know what it is you want to craft before you begin crafting, and then try to find out the best way to get there. If you are just sort of YOLOing it, as it were, and just hoping for the best randomization of mods, would fall into the territory of gambling, as it were, and that is very risky waters. Right now, sometimes there's such a wide margin on the potential outcome, a good outcome or even a moderate outcome, that can still be profitable. But chasing, what the fuck is this? Chasing outcomes rather than understanding the underlying steps is a dangerous game, and one that is not going to lead to net positive outcomes in the long run. And so, again, acting with intentionality and specificity and purpose should always be first and foremost in your mind when it comes to crafting. And so, as we mentioned, we're looking for triple flat damage, or in the case of either a dusk ring or a penumbra ring, that would be quadruple, right? And so if we take a look here, we're on PoE DB2 under the ring modifier section. The reason I use this and not Craft of Exile is because this one is up to date. Craft of Exile hasn't been updated since the first early access, so it doesn't have, the weights are slightly off on bases that were pre-existing, like the rings. And then for things like spears and stuff, they just don't have the weights at all. So I still will use Craft of Exile for some things, but PoE DB2 at the moment is a better resource for seeing this stuff as the game is currently in its current state. All right, so we can see here that we've got fizz damage to attacks, fire, cold, and lightning. And so the item level required for these is 76, 77, 76, and 76. And then on the suffix side, right, if you're doing a penumbra ring or a dusk ring, this is less relevant since there's fewer of them. But we can see, all right, well, what modifiers do we lose or what modifiers are above the item levels we just listed? And so we can see that we've got, all right, mana regen at 79, lightning res, gold res, fire res, and chaos res at 82, 82, 82, and 81. And then that is it, right? So if we are able to item level restrict, right? Meaning that since these are the prefixes we want, anything that is above that item level on the prefix side presents as a potential fail case scenario. So, for example, on the prefixes, the only mods that are above that are chaos damage, which is item level 78, rarity, which is 81, and then you also have mana, which is 77. And so if you were to have, let's say, 2 of these flat damages and you were to roll chaos damage or to roll rarity, right, that would quote unquote brick your item, since the whittling is based on item level, and that means one of your good or desired modifiers would be lower than the item level of one of your undesired ones. And so we can limit that or limit our exposure, sometimes entirely remove it. In this case, we can severely limit that by making it our item level of our ring the maximum value of our desired modifiers. And so 77 for flat cold damage, right? That'll remove the possibility of us being able to roll rarity of items found and chaos damage. It'll still allow us to roll mana, but there are ways around that, which I'll get to obviously shortly. And then on the suffixes, it removes the resistances and mana regen. And so if we type 77 up here, we can now see what the highest item level mods are. And so on the suffixes, we can see the highest item level mod now is rarity, which is pretty good. And then we've got strength, dex, and int, right? Now those are great, right? Great mods. And so if you have a breach ring, for example, because that's, you're going to have 3 suffixes there, that means that by using Witlings, you could force that ring to be in a scenario. If you were to roll it infinitely, it will end up as a rarity, attribute, no matter what. Or you could do rarity, attribute, and then your third one can be a lower level one. And so you could choose whatever you wanted, so all res or whatever that is. And so that's a great scenario there. With the Dusk Ring, it would just be 2 of them. So you would either, and most likely, you'd either end up with double attributes or rarity. Or in the case of a penumbra ring, because it only has 1 suffix, naturally, because there's ways to limit between prefixes and suffixes with either a dextral annul or a dextral erasure, you could roll that to whatever you want that within the item level consideration there. And so that is why we have to, it is of paramount importance that you look into these item level restricting factors, especially if you plan on using omens, because omens are so expensive. Failure to plan is a it's a plan to fail. That sound like your 4th grade gym teacher, but it really does ring true with crafting. And because omen crafting is so high, it's so expensive relative to crafting at lower levels of material cost. You really do want to make sure that you appropriately plan ahead. So we've now determined that what we want to get is the to get our triple or our quadruple is item level 77 as an optimized. And we know that we want to have either a breach ring, a penumbra ring, or a dust ring. Now, one thing too, as a caveat to that to mention, is that with breach rings, it is less relevant because there are less prefixes. The more prefixes you have, the more important it is to item level restrict. Because because of the presence of fractured mods, right, that means you can always lock in at least 1 modifier. And so on a breach ring, you can always lock in 1 flat damage type. And that means that you can just chaos for your second one and whittle for your third one. And so in that case there's far less of a, since you only have to use whittlings on 1 modifier, while it still obviously increases the chances you could fail or brick it, as it were, that does mean that there is a much lower risk as compared to if you were to do it on a dusk, and definitely if you were to do it on a penumbra ring, because penumbra rings have 5 prefixes, right? So you definitely don't want to get into a situation where you've got triple flat damage and then you add chaos damage on there, and now that chaos damage is stuck forever and is completely useless, and the item has essentially lost a good amount of its value. Now, another thing to keep in mind too is that while I'm going to show you guys how to fully flesh these out from, first prefix, actually including the bases, all the way out to 6 affixes, there are exit strategies at each stage where there are points for profit. It is better to do something 100% correctly and progress 10% of the way than it is to go 100% on something that is 0% correct. Because the game always will scale, like there is an infinite state of inflation on currency. The game is progressive and items are not soul bound. That means the floor on gear is constantly going to go up, and mid-range and lower end items are constantly going to get pushed down in terms of their relative value. Furthermore, the further you proceed into a league, the more and more people are going to rely on crafted items to fill out their needs with respect to character progression, right? At the beginning, like a week into a league, people might have 1 or 2 crafted items on, but 2 months into a league, people are going to be almost entirely in crafted items, with exception, of course, of like the unique items they need for their build. And so if you have an item that is only 1 or 2 mods, but those 1 or 2 mods are done at the appropriate item level, they're the correct mods, and they're put in the correct order, there's always going to be a market of people who are willing to pay for those to finish the craft. Now, again, it's very important. I state this in many of my videos, but just to restate it, it is very important to detach yourself from the mentality that a good item is a good craft. Crafting is not the process of taking the strongest mods as they pertain to the performance of your character and then putting them on in that order in sort of a willy-nilly fashion. It is a very logical and sort of step-based process to reverse engineer the best way to do something, almost like a Sudoku puzzle, right? And so the order you're going to put things on and the reasons why are rarely, if ever, going to have anything to do with how much that impacts your character. It has to do with the logic of the crafting steps. And because so many people fail to recognize this, the ones that do tend to have a lot of currency because they're probably crafting themselves. And the guys who have a lot of currency are willing to spend a lot of money. And so even though you might have a hard time believing that, you know, certain things I'm about to mention sell at the price they do, the reason is because they're done properly. And the people who know how to do it properly are always the ones with the biggest budgets because the game has a vibrant player economy. And naturally, that knowledge asymmetry has a market impact. That market impact favors those who hold it. And that favors them, obviously, in a very positive way. And so they are willing to pay prices that might seem silly to you know, your layman or your non-experienced player, especially when they look at the totality of an item versus the totality of a craft and think that the finished item provides a lot more value than, say, a 2-modded item might, but that finished craft has no potential to be changed thereafter, but the 2-modded item, it might be fully perfect to that stage, and so it can be purchased to be continued upon with the craft. And so it's important to remember that. And even if you are somebody who has a lower budget and a lower crafting understanding, do not think that this is limiting to you in the sense that you have to make a mirror item for this to be worthwhile information to understand. In fact, I would almost say it's the opposite. Because if you've got that much currency, there's so many ways to be able to diversify and just do simple arbitrage things that, you know, you can compound your rate of return to a point that there's, you know, it becomes almost trivial to make money. But if you're at a point of resource scarcity, understanding how you can take advantage of the marketplace of people that do have those, you know, that have aggregated that large amount of wealth is a very, very easy way to sort of parabolically scale up your resources. Now, again, the different bases do have different relevance factors here. For example, breach rings, the vast majority of them, unless you're starting from scratch, are going to be item level 82 because people are killing Zesht and getting them from that. And, you know, it's going to be far more difficult to find them at that item level, but it's less relevant as well. And with the breach rings, because they're so high volume, right, if you're not planning on going either the perfect triple tier 1 prefixes, there are so many people that like fracture breach rings, and there's just such a high volume of them that there is a smaller margin in that area. And so it's okay to roll a breach ring that is not item level restricted, because you're likely going to buy that one at that first stage of the craft as opposed to craft it from scratch because there's such a high availability because of how many people are actively participating in that market. But do be careful to be aware of your margins on these things. Again, the margins are going to shift, but as long as you pay due attention to what your modifiers are, you can see the weights here, right, and the total weights of the pool, and then you just take your probabilities in that scenario. So if something is a 1 in 50, and it costs 10 exalts a try, that means it's going to cost you 500 exalts on average, right? You can then compare that to the market price. If that thing sells for 1,000 exalts, that gives you a good window of profitability. If you're able to, if you go and look and that thing costs 300 exalts on the market, you just go buy the thing that's 300 exalts and you don't waste the time crafting it, right? And so at each one of these stages, as long as you're putting in the appropriate forethought, you can make that calculus, and there's no universality to it because obviously the market is dynamic and it's based on player behaviors and preferences. So the prices on things are going to change based on, you know, supply and demand, but also other factors too, like, you know, meta shifts, meta trends, availability. People pay more for bulk and PoE, which is fairly unique, stuff like that, right? But again, if you're doing either a penumbra or a dusk, I would say it is of paramount importance that you do item level restrict those. All right, so that's what we're going to do with the item level. Now, the next thing, what mod to fracture? All right, so fracturing is one of the things added this patch that makes crafting significantly easier. In particular, because with a crafted mod, you can guarantee a double tier 1 on any item with basically zero investment. Well, zero as it pertains, like in the grand scheme of the totality of a cost to make a perfect item. Because you can always get the fractured mod, right? And then you can always chaos the second mod, right? So you can annul, after you get your fractured mod, you can annul the item down so that there's only one other additional mod, and you can just chaos that one other mod like forever, like this right here, for example, right? I can just chaos this item over and over and over until I get, let's say, T1 flat cold damage, right? And so no matter what, if you get that fractured mod and you get the correct one, you can always get your item double tier 1. And when I say tier 1, I mean the maximum tier for flat damage in PoE 2 nomenclature. That would be double tier 9. And if you're on a breach ring, right, that's 2 out of 3 prefixes done already, right? And so you're only one prefix away from being, having a mirror base, right? And so because of that, your fractured mod is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And not enough people pay attention to this, and this is probably the biggest mistake, aside from the item level restricting, that I see. And this actually transcends simply the lower end crafting market. I would say when I looked earlier, about 30 to 40% of mirror items were done incorrectly. Now, when I say something's done incorrectly, think about it as like you come to a fork in a road, right? And you're trying to get to a final destination, and there's 3 paths there. One path to the left takes 12 kilometers. The straight path is 8 kilometers, and the right path is 5 kilometers, right? All 3 of those paths might lead to the destination, but if you're trying to get there as quickly as possible, then you want to take the right path. That is objectively correct. Now, your outcome is going to be the same, but it doesn't mean that the steps that you took there, or the destination you took, or the route you took on your travel was the correct one, right? Luck exists in a vacuum. It doesn't pan out over time, though. There are lucky crafts, but there are no lucky crafters. If you want to consistently experience success with your items, it's important that you pay due attention to this. And again, the fact that somebody had something and it's done differently does not mean they did it correctly. So again, don't necessarily confuse your outcomes with your underlying steps or processes of logic that led there, because outcomes are fickle and they are ever changing. And if you look at them, if you apply recency bias, and you're successful, you're going to think you're a genius all the time. And if you planned everything out and you hit a fail case scenario, you're going to think you're an idiot and that it's a waste and you probably never craft again. Neither of those things are true. Tends to fall in the middle, and the best way to control that is by allowing qualitative measurements to fly out the window and try and stick to the numbers. And that's what we're going to do here, and what I'm going to show you guys how to do. All right. So I know that's a big preamble, 22 minutes. Wow. But very important to understand. Now, for this one, I'm going to show you guys on a penumbra ring, and I'll make reference to breach rings too. But the penumbra ring is where you can get quad damage plus accuracy. That's probably your best. At the moment, 56% of players in the game are using spears, the majority of which are on Amazon. Amazon obviously gets a ton of value from accuracy. On a Deadeye, you'd probably want lightning damage percentage. And then if there's other builds that are using flat damage, it's going to vary between them. But those are probably your 2 highest value options there. It's also possible you could get life as well. 119 life would be useful for builds. And if you're using MOM, EB, or if you're just struggling with mana, especially if you've got like a +5 to skill weapon and a +3 amulet, mana could be an issue. So flat mana is actually not a terrible roll either. But typically accuracy or lightning damage percent, in some cases perhaps cold damage percent, would be your desired 5th prefix on a penumbra ring. On a dusk ring, naturally, you would just want the 4 flat damage types. On a breach ring, you'd want 3 flat damage types, etc. I imagine you guys can infer these things yourself. So with a penumbra ring, the first thing that you're going to want to do, as we said, since we've chosen our base now, we said, the more modifiers, the more important it is to item level restrict them. Right now, if we go on the trade site here and we try to get a item level 77 penumbra ring, you are going to notice that they are incredibly scarce and they are quite expensive. And that might be off-putting, right? If we go penumbra 77. There are only 41 of them for sale. It can't be corrupted either. Right? So there are now 40 of them. And then if we go not fractured, there's only 13 of them. And with the exception of this guy, I'm not sure if he's here or not, you can see they start off at 15 divs a piece. right? And they go all the way up. After that, they escalate all the way 40, 50 divs a piece, right? And if we keep the fractured on there, you can see that that's a brick fracture, that's well, it's tier 1 light, but brick fracture, brick fracture, brick fracture. There we go. I actually have the cheapest penumbra ring available that has a fractured T1 mod, and you can see that's 60 divs. After myself, though, the next cheapest one is 100 divs for a fractured mod, right? So again, to point out, the cheapest ring, with the exception of the 2 that I have listed, with a tier 1 fractured mod is 100 divines, okay? And even if you take my price, 59 divines. So again, for a third time, one modifier on a correct item level ring is 60 divines, right? So this should start getting you excited. If you take a look down here at the bottom, you'll notice, okay, mirror ring, 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 huh? Janubu, Belton, Janubu, 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 Bow, Janubu. Do you notice a consistent trend here? That the people, disproportionate amount of the people that are tend to transact in mirror items seem to be sticking to this one item level. Should perhaps be a giveaway. But a lot of people don't. Now, if we take away the item level, we can see there's 344 of them, 384 of them online, right? And so the 77s are obviously a pretty small margin of that. And because they're so expensive, right, it can be rather difficult to get your hands on them. And so don't allow that to dissuade you too much, because there's a little bit of a trick here. Pretty simple trick, but one that people often overlook. Now, again, if you could pay 15 divs for a clean one, right? Or if you do what I do, and you can navigate this rather easily. What I did was actually buy one that was fractured. Now, there's only, the cheapest one right now is 8 divs. And the cheapest one with a brick fracture is 13 divs. That's because I just bought 4 of them. But earlier today, about an hour or 2 ago, I was able to buy 3 rings that had a brick fracture, item level 77, and they were 2 divs, 2 divs, and 4 divs. So on average, that's at 6, 8, so 2.7 divs on average. Now you might say, well, what good is a penumbra ring with a brick fracture? Well, if you take a look here, we've got an item level 77 one that has 111 life. Not great, right? And obviously we can't really craft on that. But what do we do after that? We just remove the ceiling limit here, make sure it's not corrupted. And you can see you can get other penumbra rings for 10 chaos each, 70 chaos, 15 chaos, whatever. Go and buy 2 more of them. Item level 79, item level 79. And they can have brick fractures. Then you're going to come to your reforging bench. And you're going to go like this. Now, because the lowest item level of the 3 rings is 79, when we reforge it, voila, item level 77. And now it is a clean ring. And so again, this is now worth 15 divs. I have already sold 2 of the reason I only had 1 of them unidentified there is because I sold 2 of them. And as you see, they're 15 divs a piece. To restate, I paid 2.7 divs on average. And in the couple hours since I did that, I have made 20 or 30 divines of sales on those 2 rings that in totality cost me, 8 divs. So the 2 of them would account for 5.4, meaning we just made 24 divines of profit already at that stage. And not in a hypothetical sense, in a very real sense on this stream, right? So there we go. There's your first vector for profit. But if you want to craft it, there you go. Now you've got a clean base, item level 77. So what's the next step we want? If we look at our little sheet here. All right, what mod to fracture? Now this is very, very important. And this is the part that people fuck up all the time. We know what our prefixes are, right? And again, it's very important that you highlight what prefix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you're crafts, you should always know exactly what it is you're going after. And at least with your prefixes and suffixes, because you're going to do them separately. So we want to have a flat, 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 flat. And then for our 5th one, we probably want to have accuracy, because I'm in Amazon. But if you're playing a Deadeye, it might be lightning or whatever, right? Okay, so this is what we know we want for our prefixes. And so then we take an inventory of what those are and how they differ. So the first thing we want is the mod. So lightning, fire, cold, fizz. Okay. And then we want to know the item level and we want to know the weighting of that modifier. Okay. Now, because these are all prefix, you'd also, if you're looking at an item at large, you want to know if it's a prefix or suffix. Obviously, we've already done that stage. So these are the 2 things we want to know. Now, lightning. item level 76, and it has a weight of 200. Fire, item level 76, and has a weight of 200. Cold, item level 77, and it has a weight of 200. Fizz, item level 76, and it has a weight of 350. Now, we also want to know what other modifiers are of equal or greater item level to a point that they might interfere with the craft or could influence the craft in some way. And so here we want to rank these by item level, right? So we'll put cold up on the top because it's 76. And so up here you also have mana, which is item level 77, and it has a weight of 1,000. And then you've got cold percentage, fire percentage, and lightning percentage, which are item level 76, similar to the flat damage types. I level 76, I level 76. And this one I think they're weighted 500. I just want to confirm that. Yeah, they're 500. Okay, and these have a 500 weight. And then just below that, you might want to check a couple things too. You've got evasion tier 1 at item level 74. And you've got mana tier 2 at item level 69. And the evasion is a weighting of 1,000. And the mana is also 1,000. All right. So this is what a ring looks like in terms of prefixes, in terms of the ones that we want, and in terms of the ones that are in a similar sphere or item level range, whereby they might influence the potential choices we make once whittlings come involved. So the first thing that we want to do is figure out what to fracture. And so that's only going to be involve these 4 modifiers here, right? And so I'll make a little space between those. And so this is, again, where a lot of the mistakes I see on the trade website at least are, because people don't do this correctly. So if you look at these, which ones do you think we would want to fracture? Now, it might make sense to some people to fracture the highest level mod, or let's say the lowest weighted mod, right? Maybe people want to fracture the one that impacts the build the most, right? If you're playing in Amazon, that's probably fizz damage. Or if you're playing Lightning Spear, it might be lightning damage, right? If you want a highest item level, it might be cold. Well, the correct answer here is one of 2. Now, strategically, both of these are the same. If you're doing this on a breach ring, you're going to have to choose between the one of them, because obviously there's 4 flat damage types and you can only have 3. But on a penumbra or a dusk ring, you can have all 3. You have all the flat damage types, right? So invariably, if you're going for a 4-modded item, naturally you're going to have all of them. So it's just which order do you want them? And in that case, the correct answer is either lightning or fire damage, right? And if you are fracturing cold or fizz, you are doing it wrong. And the reason for that is as follows. Number 1, we do not want to have the highest item level mod fractured. We want to put that as our second modifier. Because if we put that second and our first mod is fractured, that means that the third modifier we're going to have to use whittlings on. And a whittling will re-roll a mod that has a lower item level. And since this is the highest item level, that means if we do this second, the third mod will always be a lower item level, with the exception of mana. But because our first mod is fractured, in this case, it's just a 50-50, right? And it doesn't even matter if it's a higher item level, as long as there's only one, because an annulment orb or a chaos can only either roll the mana away or the cold away. But since the process of getting the fracture is obviously just the fractured mod, and then getting the second modifier is chaos orbing, right? If your whittling hits mana before you get one of these, and you end up losing the cold damage, you're only going to have to spend chaos orbs to get it back. You're not losing any whittlings. And because there's such a massive gap in the price of these, that's really what you want to avoid when it comes to crafting, is losing any progress on an item that has required you to use whittlings or omens at any phase. So now the logical question might be, well, why are lightning and fire better than fizz? And that is also an easier answer. Now, fizz, again, is probably the highest impact in terms of performance, right? Because you're going to be using a fizz weapon, in my case, for Amazon. But you'll notice that the weight on fizz is 350, meaning it is 75% more common than these ones. And so what does that mean? If we know that cold is going to be our second modifier no matter what, right? And we know that anything after our second mod is going to require whittlings, we want to leave the more common modifier to whittlings, because whittlings are more expensive, right? And so we want to get the rarer, lower weighted mod first, all right, so that the higher weighted mod, so the more common mod, can show up when we have to use the more expensive materials. Now, because fire and lightning are both the same item level and they have the same weight, strategically, they are of little consequence. So you can pick either one. Now, performance-wise on your build, typically people are going to favor lightning. If you're just looking at this for like a profit vector, lightning is always going to be preferable because more people want shock, more people scale lightning. Lightning spear is obviously 100% conversion to it, so it's lightning based. And just as a base point, lightning, shock is a more powerful ailment than ignite in most cases because the vast majority of people aren't heavily investing into ailments. So just getting a basic ignite does very little, but getting a basic shock gives, at least 20% increased damage taken. So there's that reason. Again, lightning is just a very common or popular damage type within the meta currently. Furthermore, lightning is rather forgiving on the divine on it because lightning damage has a very high variability on the top end, but it has a very low variability on the bottom end, right? So when you're divining a lightning damage mod, you don't really have to worry so much about the bottom end because it's going to have very little impact on the average damage of it. But the top end is going to have a very, very wide range, right? And so if you go for that as your first modifier, you can ensure that since you're going to fracture it and it can never be changed, right? You can ensure that you fracture a very high-end roll on the top end. And again, the bottom end's not super important. And that way, you don't have to, when you're divining the ring later, you don't want to get into a position where if you look, the range on it is 48 to 71, right? So that's a 1 in 24. 24 divines to get a 71, right? If you look at something like fire damage, right? Even though fire damage actually, if you're taking the prefixes and the suffixes into account, it becomes a 1 in 11 times a 1 in 16, right? So that's a 1 in 176 versus the lightning, which is a 1 in 4 times a 1 in 24, so 1 in 96, right? So 176 to get a perfect roll on fire is obviously more divines than it is on the lightning. But again, the fire damage is actually easier to divine later on because you've got, it can be like, you can be like 2 or 3 off on the bottom end and like 2 or 3 off on the top end because they're far closer together in their range sphere. Whereas on a lightning, it's like, unless you're at the very top end of it, it's more or less a brick. And because there's such a huge wide range there, it can be rather difficult to get that. And because when it comes to probabilities, right, if you were to take, let's just say you had just lightning damage and just fire damage on an item and you were trying to divine it and you wanted to get a perfect divine and neither of them were fractured, that would then become multiplicative within itself, right? So it would be, what did we say it was, 96 and 176 to get to divine those two mods together. If you had them unfractured, it would cost 16,896 divines, right? That's pretty crazy, right? But because the bottom end on lightning is not really that important, you can see that now drops down to 4,200, right? And on the fire damage, because you're not so much tied into having perfect high end on it, because it's not just a single vector, you can, like the range between it is rather small. It's much smaller, right? It's only 16 in terms of the range here, and it's only 11 on that range. And whereas on this one, the range is 24. So that's one of the things I factor in. This is really, really specific on that sense. But again, either a fire or a lightning fracture is perfectly fine. The lightning fractures do have a higher market value, though, because of the reasons I mentioned, and just because it's, it's a stronger, like there's more lightning-based builds at the moment. And so for the purposes of this, I'm going to proceed as if we have decided that lightning is going to be our first prefix that we are going to attempt to fracture. All right. However, if you get fire, perfectly fine as well. And so again, stage 1, we chose the item level. We chose a penumbra ring. We 3-to-1'd it to get a clean base back. And we've now got a ring like this. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to think about the fracture itself, right? So we want lightning damage. And a fracturing orb makes it so that you have to have at least 4 modifiers, right? Now, if you can do it with 5 mods or with 6 mods, but obviously 25% chance with 4, 20% chance with 5, and a 16.6% chance with 6. So naturally, you only want it to have 4 mods, if you can, to have the highest chance to succeed. It's especially because this base type, as I pointed out, is like 15 divs. And especially further on top of that, because because of I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Anyways, unimportant. Oh, sorry. Yeah, especially because they're so the fractures themselves are so expensive, right? Like as I said, you can just get a tier 1 fractured lightning damage mod, and it's like 100 divs on this base, right? So you obviously want to increase the probability that you can get those fractures. Now, on a breach ring or on a dust ring, because a dust ring has 2 suffixes and a breach ring has 3 suffixes, you can always bypass that no matter what with a greater annulment and a dextral annulment, right? So even if you see a ring, like you make a ring that has tier 1, say flat lightning prior to a fracture, or if you want to buy one that has tier 1 lightning prior to a fracture, you can always guarantee to reduce that to 4 mods without risking that lightning, because you can deterministically remove 2 suffixes. But that's not a possibility on a penumbra ring because there's only 1. So naturally, you can reduce it by 1 suffix if you want to, but there's no way if you put 6 mods onto a penumbra ring for you to guarantee it to 4 without risking whatever mod it is you're trying to fracture. Because of that, I recommend, and it will save you money in the long run, to just simply, from this stage, you're going to have to basically, there's no nuance to at this point, but you have to chaos lightning damage to attacks onto the penumbra ring. And if you have 6 mods on there, because that would have 5 prefixes, 1 suffix, that would obviously make it easier to roll the flat lightning, since there would always be 4 other prefixes that are blocked, right? Meaning that the proportionate weight for the lightning would go up. However, once you did hit it, you would be forced to spend 8 divines on a dextral annul to remove 1 mod, and you'd still only have a 20% chance. Whereas, if you were to chaos when there's 4 mods, in most of the time you'll still have 3 prefixes blocked, sometimes 2 because one of them can go to a suffix. But once you've hit it, you'll only ever have the 4 mods, and so you don't have to worry about removing any prior to the fracture. So I recommend rolling it with only 4 mods when you're doing that. Again, on a breach ring or a dust ring, I also recommend the same thing if you are chaosing to get your flat modifier on there. But on breach rings, because as I said at the beginning of the video, there's so many of them in the market, it's generally speaking just better to buy a base that already has the T1 flat on it. And there's multiple ways you can go about that, which I'll cover later on, that you can do that people don't think about. So in that case here, I'll just, for fun's sake, I do have one that's pre-prepared. Our next step would just be to sit here, and again, there's literally 0 skill or nuance to this outside of what we just discussed, but this process itself has no specific strategy to it other than to just keep clicking. One thing you may want to consider, and this is going to depend on the price of things at the market at the time, if you have like a very low flat lightning mod on this, in our case, or if you're that's tier 2, or if you were going for a different mod, obviously that modifier, naturally if you have T1, or like let's say the lowest tier of flat lightning on here, and there's tier 1 fizz. As I said, it is 75% more likely than the other ones, so unsurprising that we would get that. Now, a lot of people would probably try to fracture at that point, especially because that's a very good roll, right? 19 out of 19, 29 out of 32. It's a nice high fracture. But again, that would be incorrect for the reasons I mentioned. But to save some time here, I do have one here, 4 modded, item level 77, and it's already got the flat lightning damage on it. So, just imagine that... revisionist history, we hit the lightning. So that's that step. Now, what's the next step? We now take a look at this, and it's 1 to 4. Again, the bottom end, not super important, but the top end, you can see we have 55 out of 71. Now, that's very, very low on the range. Because there's 20 quality on this, obviously, we can see that would become 66, right? And even if you assumed the highest and top end, the highest it could be would be 4. Right, which would give you an average damage of 35, right? Now, a top end one would be 71 times 1.2 plus 4. So 89 divided by 2 is 45.5 average damage, right? And so that is 10 average damage more. So 10 divided by 35, you are talking about 29% more average damage between the top end and the bottom end. And a fractured mod can never be changed. And so I know this is going to hurt some of you guys, but the correct step here is to do this. We're getting very unlucky. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Jesus Christ, 15. Okay, I'm getting... Oh! Oh, it's a YouTube video. I'm not going to play this out. We hit a perfect divine. 4 to 71. As I mentioned, that's a 1 in 96. So we spent 19 divines. Yes, frustrating, but that is a 100% perfect fracture. Now, I'm going to show you something real quick as a caveat to tell you how important this is, because it's one of the things people don't often think about. Here is a breach ring that I accidentally forgot to divine before doing this one time, which is why it has a very low end roll on it. Okay, you can see here, it's 2 to 53, right? I was doing a bunch of them at once and I screwed up. Now, that means that it has, and that is with quality, right? So that with quality, it's 2 to 74, which means its average damage is 38, right? 38 on a breach ring with a fracture, I can tell you, is about 10 divines. 10 to 15 divines. I know this video is running long, actually, so I won't show you, but that is 10 to 15 divines. Now, this is a breach ring, conversely, with a 4 to 71, a perfect fracture. All right? Now, this one is much easier to look up, so I can just show this to you directly. Breach ring. Okay, breach ring. Lightning. 52. Fracture. And then we can put like minimum 10, we can put minimum 20 divs, just so it filters out all the like the low end bricked ones. All right. Oh, and it can't be it can't be corrupted either. All right. Let's find the cheapest fracture. Mine at 100 divines. 120 divines. 150 divines. So again, the same modifier, right? Both of these are the highest tier of lightning, T9, T9. And the difference between a well-rolled fracture and a poorly rolled fracture, in that case, is 15 divs compared to 100, 120 divs. 100 is probably a bit of an undersale on my side, right? So that is how important the fracturing stage is. And again, that doesn't exist if it's the incorrect types. If you go look up a perfect fizz fracture or even a cold fracture, it'd be a fraction of the price. Lightning is the highest, as I said, because of its, strategic, or like its, character benefits. On a penumbra ring, though, a fire fracture is just as valuable as a lightning, since you're going to go for all 4 of them anyways. But the lightning in particular, because people care about it so much, getting a perfect roll is wildly valuable. If I hit this fracture, I'm going to scream. Fuck me. We missed the fracture. So that's a bummer. But in any case, there are ways that you can proceed from that. In this one here, I will probably sell this. But one thing that's cool, if you miss a fracture on one of these, right, even though we just wasted, quote unquote, wasted 19 divs, in the long run, that'll play out to your benefit. If you are trying to go for like that quad flat damage. If you're crafting on a penumbra and not a breach ring, and you're going for quad flat damage, you should just know ahead of time that that's going to be a multiple hundreds of divines per suit. And so while it could be frustrating, or it might be like mentally hard to accept the fact that you're going to spend, I mean, that took way too many divines. Normally I would stop around like 66 plus or 35 average damage or higher. So like the totality of the 2 mods exceeding 70, right? That's usually my bare minimum. So, but again, the higher end is more important on that. But yeah, if I can get the average damage catalyze to 35, so 35 times 2 being 70, that's usually like my bare minimum. On the breach rings, because they have 40 quality, I do anything that rolls above 90, just like aesthetically, it looks better and people pay more for it. So because it's 40 quality, 90 is I think 65 right? It might be 66 actually. Wait, sorry, 65 times 1.4. Yeah, 91. So if the flat damage on the high end is at least 65, then that means it'll be above 90 with quality, and so that's like the bare minimum I'll have on the breach ring. But what you can do here, and this is again not something that many people consider, on breach rings you don't have to bother doing this because the bases are available all the time. But as we saw earlier, penumbra rings are very expensive bases, right? And so because we brick this fracture, all we have to do is just treat it like how it was when we first were, right? All we have to do is just go buy 2 more of them, right? You just go buy 2 item level, anything above item level 77, right? And if we do that, then we can just 3 to 1 it again, and we'll get back to clean base. And you just repeat that process, right? So you buy it, make it item level 77 with the 3 to 1 mechanism. You chaos on your 2-1 flat, either lightning or fire, and then you divine it so that it's a high with the fire. It's I would want above 40 and above 25 at a bare minimum. People are less sticky about their fire rolls because people typically, the fire damage is usually just used for ignite. And ignite doesn't have a magnitude element to it in terms of applying the ailment, obviously. It's not like cold where it's based on the damage that it takes from it, and you have to like build it up and it builds upon itself and there's freeze buildup. Ignites will always get applied, so as long as you have a source of flat fire, it's fine. So the range on it is far less relevant, obviously, unless you're scaling a build that is fire as your primary damage type. Lightning shock magnitude is again based off the size of the hit, and so that's also why that's more relevant to have a higher divine on. But it's also just because of the meta preference towards lightning at the moment. In particular, getting it perfect. Another thing too, and it's a bit of a caveat, but perfect items always have an ultra premium in PoE because they can't be min-maxed any further. Right, like a perfect item as compared to an item that is 4 to 71 versus 4 to 70 is probably literally doubles the price. Like I would bet 4 to 70 is probably a 50 divine fracture. 4 to 71, as we saw, 120 dips, and that's simply because it can no longer be, it can't be made any better. And in particular, it's because mirror crafting. Right, if I craft a mirror item that has 4 to 70 on the fracture, and you then fracture one that has 4 to 71. I can't, and we both make the same item, right? You can always divine an item in the future, but a fracture can never be changed. And so for your other modifiers, you can always have the potential to make them equal. If somebody makes the same rig, you can just divine yours a bit better. But the fractured mod can never, ever be changed. And so if you fracture something that is not perfect and you planned on doing a mirror craft, you are leaving yourself susceptible to being completely boxed out of the market. And because it costs thousands of divs, obviously that is just unacceptable, right? That's why I have a 5% crit fracture, not 4.99, not 4.98, right? That also just looks really clean on this one specifically, but that's why that's of paramount importance. And again, you don't have to be fully fleshing these crafts out to profit off of them. You just need to know these things so that you can sell to the people who do, right? It's like... If you what is it like? You'll never go hungry pandering to a rich man's ego or whatever, like whatever expression it is. Just think about people in the real world who have so much money that they tip their waiters or whatever, hundreds of dollars. Like people where money's not an object. If you think of mirror crafting through that lens, these are people that are going to be, they're looking for perfection and they will pay a premium for that perfection. So I cannot understate the importance of this enough, especially with the fractured mod and especially if it's lightning damage or any damage type where magnitude is a consideration. But really it's more to do with the meta at the moment anyways. Look at that! While I'm recording this video, we sell one. Case in point, fellas. Well, we get our divining money back. So there we go. Proof of concept. So, anyways, in this case here, I actually did, I know this video is already 54 minutes long. I know I'm wordy. I really just want you guys to understand this, and crafting with this level of complexity and the nuances there, it's not something I can do very briefly. I apologize. But I did actually prepare 1,000 divines of rings ahead of time, so I didn't actually have to craft them live because that might take hours. I can just explain them step by step visually already. So in this case here, right, we'd be going for that fracture. We want to divine it so it's high. And if we miss this, all you do is 3 to 1 it. You'll get back a clean base, and you just repeat that process till you hit the fracture. All right, so Imagine now we're at a state where we've got a ring like this, right? Now, I know this is a breach ring. Just imagine that it is a penumbra ring for the purposes of continuity. So we've now got the one mod fractured, and so now we want to get our second mod, right? So we'll come back to this thing, thinking about the strategy behind this, right? And where did my... And so we've got, we chose lightning first, right? And as we talked about, we want cold damage to be our second modifier, right? Because cold damage is item level 77, right? And both fire and fizz are item level 76. So that means if we get cold damage as the second mod, we can then put on our third modifier. And when we use a whittling, all of these other mods, right, are below item level 77. And since lightning is already fractured onto there, right, we know that lightning's fractured onto there, so that can't change. And none of these mods down here can do anything to the cold flat because it's a higher item level. The only mod that presents a sticky point is mana, right? And so that means that you don't have to worry about a total weighting of 1500, 2500, 3500, right? Whereas if you didn't item level restrict and if you didn't pick cold damage as your second one, that would mean that you would have to compete with a total weight pool. So you'd have your flat lightning and your flat cold, right? And so you would want to get fire or fizz, and your potential options to hit those would be 1000, 1550, 2050, 3050. So you'd have a 550 out of 2050 chance. So 550 versus 2600. So you'd be about 4 times as likely to brick the ring as you would be able to hit the triple damage type, right? And so this is actually like the most important part probably in terms of if you want to proceed with this ring craft. Again, on breach rings, it's less so the case because since you only have to go for 2 additional mods after the fracture, it's far more like you're more likely to be able to get lucky in that case. But on a penumbra ring or a dusk ring, because you're going to be going for not just 1 more mod, but 2 more mods or 3 more mods in the case of a prefixes on a penumbra, it's absolutely imperative that you get cold as your second mod. And so you have it in a state like this, and all you do from there, it's pretty simple actually. All you got to do is divine it, or sorry, all you have to do is chaos it. But you want to make sure that you reduce it to just 1 modifier or at most 2 modifiers before doing so, right? And the reason for that is that you don't want to put 5 mods, like make it 6 modded item, and then be chaosing, and then you end up chaosing mana, tier 1 mana, and then you hit tier 1 cold. Because now you don't have any other option, right? Like it's already going to be stuck on there. You're going to have to use like a dextral annul to get rid of the suffix. Then you're going to have to 50-50 it to try and remove the mana away. And then even after that, you're stuck with the item with all these other mods. And from that point on, once you've put the tier 1 cold on there, right, you want to just be going 1 mod at a time after that. You don't want to be putting tons of mods on there because the more mods you have, the more likely you are to have a mod that can either brick it or that can complicate the math behind it, right? So again, we want to limit our exposure to risk, right? And so if you only have 1 mod that's rolling, right, you can only roll cold damage. That'll be 100% guaranteed, right? If you roll mana, no problem. You could just keep chaosing and it'll go away because you're not using whittlings yet. But once you get cold damage and your fracture with the lightning damage, right? If we exalt 1 time, right? That means that the whittling can either roll, it can roll any one of these mods, and it's no problem because it'll whittle away. The only issue would be if you hit mana, but because there's only 3 mods on there in total now, this one can't be removed. And so you just use an annul, right? And the annul will be a 50-50. If the annul removes mana, great, you just exalt and keep going until you get fire or fizz again. And if the annul does remove cold, then you've got fractured lightning and mana, so all you do is just go back to chaosing it until you get the cold again. And the cold, to get cold back is only a couple hundred chaos, so like I think it's like 350 or 400 or something, which is not nothing. It's like 15-20 divs. But again, as I just, when you're dealing with bases that are 15 divs and when you're dealing with fractures that are 100 and, blah, 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 and whittlings are like 5 divs a piece, obviously in the grand scheme of things, 15-20 divs of chaos is a very, very small cost. And so, yes, by getting cold as your second mod, that is quite literally probably the most important step going forward that a lot of people probably ignore. If you do end up getting a different flat damage type and you don't want to proceed with it, right? Or if you think it's a waste, just sell it like that, right? So let's say you've got fractured lightning and you hit like T1 fire, just sell it to modded like that. Somebody will buy it because not many people know what I'm saying or like think about it to the extent of what I'm saying to you guys now. And somebody will just see that as being like, oh my God, I could make this into a 4 tier 1, blah, 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 because they don't think about the subsequent steps, right? There will be people that will pay for it. However, from your perspective, it is like a net EV loss to you proceed from that point. So either I would recommend rolling past it, or, and I know that can be hard, like in this case right here, that is a very good fizz, right? This is a very good fizz roll. It's tier 1. That's the most impactful modifier for our character. And it has like a near perfect divine, right? But it is literally the worst mod that we could fracture there. Actually, I think cold is probably the worst fracture you could have in terms of desired mods. But, you know, sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and remember that a crafted item in terms of what's best is not always the exact same as a strong item as it pertains to your character. And occasionally you'll have to kind of bite the bullet, as it were, and just sort of accept that and be ready to move on. So now that we've established that and we've established what our correct second mod is, we know that it is flat fire, correct? Sorry, flat cold. And so, as I mentioned, I don't actually have a fractured flat lightning on either one of these rings, but the fire, as I said, is the exact same strategically, since on a penumbra ring, you have to get all 4 of them. And so either one of those is fine. In both cases here, I've got the reason I don't have any lightning ones, by the way, is because they've sold. They sell much quicker. It's not because I'm unable to hit them manifestly or anything like that. They're obviously the exact same likelihood. There's just a much bigger market for them, despite them strategically having the exact same importance. But here you can see we've got the fractured fire. We've got a divine 44 out of 50 or 45, 24 out of 29. Again, the top end being more important there because it's a wider range. That's a 1 in 11, whereas that's a 1 in 16. So that's a nice good roll enough of that. And then we chaos it to get the cold damage to attacks. And as you can see, T9, which in my nomenclature is tier 1. And then we have we've now got the item level 77 mod. We've got the fractured the fractured 76 mod, well divined with a weighting of 200 on the 77 penumbra ring, and then we exalt it to put on a third modifier. Now from here, I'm not going to do this a ton of times, but just for demonstrative sake, what you would do is just use a whittle, and as you can see, dexterity is now changed, and that's actually tier 1 strength, but that's not relevant at this stage of the ring. And so you would whittle it again. I'll do this until we get a prefix. All right, there we go. Life, whatever. Oh fuck, I'll just use the last 4. Who cares? Flat lightning. This is what I get. I'm punished. I'm being punished for referring to it as tier 1. Tier 1 flat lightning, boys. I got exactly what I wanted. But anyways, you can imagine irony. You can imagine though. Again, we'll play a little imaginary land here, especially because this video is getting so long. You can imagine that was hit as tier 1, or like my version of tier 1, so tier 9 lightning, and that would actually be the perfect setup because we now have fire, cold, lightning, and as I mentioned, fizz has a 350 weighting, and so you want to leave that till the end. Now the first 3 you can basically guarantee here with little to no headache on a penumbra ring, because if, as I mentioned, if we did hit the mana there, we could just do that annul thing. If that bricks, you just chaos it and then go back and repeat that process. But from this point onwards, and this is where on a penumbra it becomes significantly more difficult than a breach ring. We've now got the cold, lightning, and fire, right? And I will bold the lightning to indicate that it is fractured, right? And so now that means that a whittling, because the next mod we want is 76, but because fire is 76, that means if we hit one of these mods or we hit mana, right, that would be equal or higher item level than the fire flat, right? Which means a whittling would remove the flat fire if it was mana, or if we had any one of these ones, it would become a 50-50 to remove it. The cold would still be safe, But if we had mana, because that is a higher item level than this one, that fire would be rerolled. And we want to get Fizz, which is a 350 weighting, but mana plus the flat damages that are the same item level is total 2500 weighting, right? So that's 350 out of 2850 total. 350 divided by 2850. That means we'd only have about a 12% chance of hitting Fizz before, and an 88% chance of hitting one of the ones that bricks it. And so here's where there's a little bit of a strategy. And I don't actually have a live version of this, so I will show you on Craft of Exile here, which I pre-prepared. And I just divided another perfect one. I'm on fire today. All right. And so we got the Fractured Lightning, right? And then we reduced it, and we put the cold damage with our Chaos. And in this hypothetical scenario, we then also just got Fire, right? So we have it like this. Now, here's the next trick. We're going to put the Whittle on. This is broken, this thing on here, by the way, on Craft of Exile. The bunch of the weights aren't loaded properly, and Whittlings can't distinguish between certain mods. And so, like, don't actively use the emulator and think that it reflects it, because there are some things that are busted with it. But I just want to show you the next sort of strategic way to go about this. There we go. So in this situation here, we hit mana, right? And mana is a higher item level than fire. So if we use a whittling, you can see it then removes it. Now, here's the strat, though. Because mana has such a high weight, what we're going to look for is tier 2 mana. Because if we put on... I'm sorry, we'll get rid of... Imagine we hit that, right? You can also do this before you go for fire damage as well on your third prefix. But if we get tier 2 mana, if we look at the item levels again... you can see tier 2 mana is item level 69. And there's only actually one mod above that that is not one of the similar. So, like, these three are obviously above it, but those are the same item level, right? And then mana, it's obviously mana's the same mod. So if you have that one, you can't get this one, right? And so the only mod that is sort of irrelevant, but that can, like, brick it, in the sense of it would remove the mana, but it wouldn't compete with one of the other ones, is evasion item level 74, which is a tier 1, but that would still be able to be whittled away. But the really important thing, though, is that if you hit one of these ones, right, the percentage damages, those are the same item level as fire flat, whereas mana is a higher item level. The higher item level means that it'll replace the fire. These ones, it still gives you a 50-50. And if you do replace it, because the cold will still be a higher item level than all of them, you're only losing one mod of progress. Whereas with the mana, it would reroll the fire, and then you would still have cold and mana of the same item level. And so at that point, you would also have another 50-50 to get rid of the mana so that you can brick it again. And so you could potentially lose multiple items. However, if you have the flat mana tier 2, that prevents the tier 1 from rolling. Right? And then you can exalt again because you're allowed 5 prefixes, right? And then you can then you can use your whittling. And now, in terms of the overall weight, right? Instead of being 2550 versus 350, it's only 1550 versus 350. So that's 350 divided by 1900. And so that is almost 50% more likely to be able to hit that first, as opposed, 2850 minus, so it's 350 divided by 1850, not 1900, 19%, yeah. So it's 50%, 55% more likely to be able to hit the fizz. And then if you do end up, so we can just sort of thought experiment this out. Oh, shit. Right? If you do end up whittling the flat fizz. Oh, here, you know what? Sorry, I'm not going to waste time. Imagine you do hit the flat fizz, right? All right, so it would look like this. Now, the lowest item level that's on here now all of a sudden becomes the mana, right? And so you can whittle it again, and voila, the mana is all of a sudden gone. And then at that point, you would have no control over what your final suffix is. Either like there we hit T2 accuracy. I would probably keep that in that scenario. There's only like five possible outcomes. Either you'll hit tier 1 mana as your final mod, lightning percent, fire percent, cold percent, or accuracy, which would be desirable, or whatever your desirable mod is. But in terms of the ones you have to stop at, because they would be the same or a greater item level, which would mean you'd be risking too much. Once you get that fourth flat modifier on there, right? If you hit cold percent, fire, or lightning percent, that would be sharing an item level with both the fire and the fizz. So a YOLO Whitling would only have a 33% chance of succeeding. If you had mana as your final one, a tier 1 mana, similarly, you just got to keep it. But either way, because you're on a penumbra base, and this is why I think penumbra is significantly better than a dusk ring, because you have 5 prefixes, you can guarantee pretty much that you always get the 4 flat done with relatively little hassle. Whereas if you're on a dusk ring base, because there's only 4 total, if you hit the mana as your 4th mod, you've got to go back, right? Whereas on a penumbra, if you do end up getting it, so sorry, I'll rewind a couple of steps here. If you do end up getting it so that it was like fire damage, all right, so here at this stage right here, right? If we ended up whittling this and we got tier 1 mana before we got tier 1 flat fizz, okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to manually enter it again. Right? If this were a dusk ring, you'd be forced to keep it or like to restart or to lose progress. On this ring though, you could just keep it and just accept the fact that the mana's there and still put fizz onto it with relatively high probability. Or you could hit like in this case we've got cold, lightning, fire. The only other possibilities are elemental percentages, right? So if you have mana already, the only possibility is to hit either cold percent, lightning percent, fire percent, or the fizz, right? Now, cold, lightning, and fire percentages obviously have a lower value, but because of the order we crafted this in, we have lightning damage, we have cold damage, and we have fire damage, which means that the lightning cold percent, and fire percent are never technically a dead mod because they correlate with a pre-existing mod on the item. The fire damage is definitely the worst one, but it does mean it's not worthless. And that's one where you could just obviously sell it at that state, or if you wanted to. So let's say we whittle this and, oh, what's that? We end up hitting, we did it. There we go. Oh, shit. We hit it naturally. There we go. So you can see 4 flat damage done, right? And then in that case, you go for your final suffix. And because the suffix can be rolled by itself, that can be changed to whatever you want. Because of the item level restriction here, I would go with either dexterity, which gives accuracy plus attack speed on Amazon through the stacking, or I'd go with maybe $16 res. I think would be the best choices. Maybe inter strength if you needed them, or rarity, I guess, if you wanted that too. Because rarity is a 75 mod. And the mana is not a terrible mod, right? Like mana is actually quite important, and especially if you're using like MOM or EB. But again, the major point here that you're trying to get after is the quad damage types, especially if you're using a weapon that has very low flat damage on it. And a penumbra does make that pretty much a guarantee. Or at least it provides exit strategies along the way that I just highlighted that at least have a use case, right? Because again, if you didn't hit the flat fizz here, the only other possibilities, as we pointed out, would be to hit either percentage, fire, cold, or light. And cold and lightning percent both would have actual real use cases because there's cold versions of these builds and there's lightning versions of them. The fire percentage really would be the worst one you could get there. But again, if you compare the totality of that weight pool, that's 1850, only 500. So that's about a 30% chance versus a 70% chance of a valuable one. But if you do want to try and go for like the ultimate ring, and again, our version of the ultimate ring was flat accuracy, right? The easiest way to go about that, aside from getting lucky, as I mentioned, was to get either lightning or fire on your fracture. Then you put your cold damage your cold flat with a chaos orb, one mod. Then you exalt and you go for, ideally you go for fire flat or lightning flat, whichever one you didn't fracture. And then you go for fizz as your final one. Now here's a contingency. Well, what if you get fire or fizz? Like what? So say let. So I'll stick with the hypothetical we have here. So we've got lightning fractured. We've rolled our cold, and instead of because we started using whittlings, right? If we whittle into fizz instead of fire, that's okay, right? It's better to get fire first because the whittling, we want to save the more common mod for last. But because we've already started using whittlings, naturally that's fine. It's not like you should roll over the fizz to get the fire. It's just going to be a lot less likely that you'll end up with the quad flat if you leave fire to the end. Because at that very last stage, as we said, you can block mana with tier 2, right? And but you're always going to have to contend with these three. And because fire is, fizz is 75% more likely to show up than fire. So instead of being a 350 out of 1850, it's a 200 out of 1700, right? So we had like almost a 20% chance with the fizz, whereas with the fire, it's only 11.7, right? So it's literally almost, almost twice as hard to get that. And that difficulty is measured in whittlings that are 5 divs almost each, right? So again, strategically, definitely better to get the fire as your third mod, or if you fractured fire, the lightning. But if you do get the fizz, you can still proceed with it. And from the next mod, let's say we did get that fizz there, I would still try to get the mana, right? When I say try to get the mana, you don't really have any control over it at that stage because you would just exalt again, right? So you'd have 3 flat damages, you exalt. And, for the breach rings too, because I know that's probably more common. For the breach ring side of things, obviously you just stop after 3 mods, right? All of this advice, it's the same thing. Fracture, lightning, or fire. Put cold second, and then just chaos your third mod, or whittle your third mod, right? It's going to be harder if it's item level 77. The only thing that can happen is the mana. If you have an 82, which is pretty common on breach rings, you can hit if you get chaos damage percentage, or if you get rarity, which are both higher item levels. Because there's only 3 prefixes, it's actually the same thing as getting mana. It's just you just annul it away. You either sell it or you annul it away. Because there's only it's still a 50-50, right? Because the fracture mod can't be removed. And so the fact that they're at higher item level actually doesn't matter on an 82 breach ring compared to if it were a penumbra or whatever, since there's only 3 prefixes in total. And so there's actually not a difference there aside from the fact that the weights get added, right? It's still better to have the lower item level. When I say there's no difference, I mean there's no difference in the fact that it's a 50-50. Like you're not going to have, like, for example, on a penumbra ring, you could have cold and fizz. And then if you rolled mana, right, you're not going to want to do that because it could remove one that you've already had to use whittlings on. Whereas on a breach ring, it can only remove one that you have to use chaos orbs on, which is the cold. So in that sense, it's not different. However, rarity has a 1000 weighting and chaos damage, I think, is a 500 weighting. And so instead of contending with, because you'll be using whittlings at that stage, instead of contending with a 550 compared to 1000, right? You'd be comparing a 550 compared to 2500, right? So that's 5 times more likely to brick if you have it at item level 82 versus 40% more likely to brick if you have it at 77. And so the 3 prefixes is relatively easy on the breach ring, which is why they're not super. I mean, they're super expensive. A 3-2-1 breach ring, I think, is like 400 or 500 divs, but I mean that's like a third of a mirror, right? Whereas if you get a 4 tier 1, even triple tier 1 penumbra rings, you're talking mirror territory already, just because of the difficulty and strategy that involves within the amount of whittlings that need to be used. And so if you're a breach ring crafter, congratulations, you're done. That's how you get the triple tier 1 prefixes as a TLDR. All right, fracture either lightning or cold, or sorry, fracture either lightning or fire. Chaos orb cold on there. Exalt it and then whittle until you hit either one of the other 2 flat damage types. And if you don't hit it, then you could just use a null. And when you don't hit it, I mean, if you hit either mana first, or if it's an 82, if you hit mana, rarity, or chaos, use an annul, go back and do it. Another thing too, if it's item level 82, you may actually want to do your suffixes. Like if you roll fire, cold, or lightning resistance while whittling your third prefix, I would actually just keep those because that's pretty much what your suffixes are going to be guaranteed to be anyways. So you can get triple res, and that way your whittlings will be guaranteed to roll a prefix after you do, because you're probably going to hit at least a couple suffixes to the max item level 82 in the process of rolling for your third flat damage type. And so if you allow those to just stay on there and exalt again and whittle again, either you'll fill out your suffixes triple tier 1 in the process of going for your prefixes, and because sinestral annuls will remove, if you do end up hitting mana or rarity or chaos percentage, you can just use the sinestral annul instead of a regular one, and then exalt, and then keep whittling again. And that way your whittlings will actually have double the value, because when you have open suffixes, the whittling can change it to a prefix or a suffix, right? And so that's something to factor in there as well. That's not an option if it's item level 77, because there's no suffixes that are a higher item level, obviously, or greater. Because the highest item level suffix when it's item level restricted is rarity at 75. So it's not, there's no suffix that you could put into place on a penumbra ring even to prevent it from being able to roll suffixes. With the exception of, I suppose you could put rarity on there actually. And if you put on rarity tier 1, it would prevent, the only mods that would be higher than it would be percentages or the flats. However, if you did that, then anytime that you put a mod on there that you would have to roll away, you'd have to use a dex roll and all. You can factor that in. There's some strategy to it therein, but with the breach rings in particular, if it is item level 82, and the vast majority of them are, if you're buying the flat lightning, that is, and like trying to fracture it yourself and stuff, it's very likely the base will be 82. If you get to the phase where you're trying to roll the third prefix, don't be afraid to keep a suffix, as long as it's a higher item level than your prefixes. And again, in most cases, you'll end up, if you just do that over and over, you'll probably end up with tri-res by the time it's done. On a penumbra ring, though, to get back to that one, right, the first two steps are always going to be the same, right? We want to get the 77. We want to get either flat lightning or flat fire. We want to divine that to a high roll. We want to fracture that roll. We want to chaos flat cold damage. And we want to make sure that there's only the two mods at that time. Then we exalt our third mod. Up until that phase, that is always what should be done. That is a universal. Then from there, there's a bit of a divergent path, as it were, in the sense of what is your next mod, right? So you could actually, if you roll with a whittling, because once you start, after these mods, you have to start using whittlings, right? And so if you start using whittlings and you hit mana tier 2, so your ring would look like this in that scenario. If I hit the mana tier 2 as the third mod, I would keep it there even, and I would exalt again, and I would roll it like that. Because in this situation here, right, this is blocking the mana from rolling. And if we do roll a higher mod, like we did right there, right, like this is a higher item level than the mana, still lower than the cold, obviously, but higher than the mana, the next whittle is just going to remove the mana. And if that happens, all you do is then just remove with the dextral annul, and then you can just go back to using whittlings as you normally would until you get your third type again. And if it doesn't change it to a suffix immediately, it will have, like, it's a 50-50 to change it to a suffix. So just do it one more time or whatever. And so you can just repeat that process until you either get it. So once you start whittling, if you hit tier 2 flat mana, I would say keep that because it'll block tier 1 flat mana, which means you don't have to do the cold rerolling. Or if you don't hit the mana before hitting one of your flat damage types, obviously just keep whichever flat damage you get. Strategically, it's better to have fire because the fizz is much more common. But if you get fizz, that's fine. Keep that. And so that'll leave you at the state like this. Right? And from this phase right here, again, you exalt. So let's say the life was from the exalt. There's nothing you can do here except for whittle. Oh, there, you see we got the T1 rarity there. So we could actually play this out here if we wanted to. I'll use an exalt again, and we got the rarity. And so the whittling here is going to, tier 1. Oh, See, this is one where I would struggle. If I had fizz, cold, lightning, accuracy, I would probably fucking just... Like, what's the YOLO exalt there? Lightning damage percent. I would probably leave this up to the whims of whatever it got. Like there, I'd probably, because that evasion is higher, I'd probably keep that. The flat fire is not that important relative. But again, the market doesn't always reflect the difficulty of these things. And so, yeah, you could do it like this, right? And then you're still up to RNG here. Like there are, all crafting has elements of RNG. It's not, I understand when people call it gambling. I mean, definitionally, it's not gambling because gambling is predicated upon the staking of something of value in a game of chance where skill is not involved. If there is skill involved, or there's if there's strategy involved, it is definitionally not gambling. And obviously, there is a very relevant strategy as it pertains to success or failure with this. That doesn't mean that people can't necessarily can't make them without strategy or without doing it this way. But objectively, if you do think these steps through and you were to do this a million times, you would have better outcomes. And so with that final mod there, again, we hit lightning damage here. Lightning damage, you could consider keeping. That's after the accuracy, probably the more valuable one. And if you wanted to keep that and go for the next mod, you could try to. But again, if you hit mana here, you'd be bricked on that. And so, if you do end up hitting another 76 modifier, oh, sorry. Oh, I got. Is that the tier 2? No, it's tier 3. All right, sorry, I lost it, so I'll just go through it again. But if you do end up hitting a 76 modifier, so tier 1 chaos, or sorry, fire, cold, or lightning percentage, I would at that stage I would probably just sell that ring, frankly. But if you did want to proceed, it's probably better to either to 50-50, like right here. Like this, right? I would probably just sell this, frankly, or I would exalt it and then whittle that last mod and then sell that because whatever, no matter what that other one landed on. Because the only way to proceed here is to go for a 50-50 between fizz and lightning. And this is obviously, you'd have to get rid of, you'd have to get rid of your suffix too before doing that. And so you'd have it like this, right? And so you would whittle. And if you fail that 50-50, as we just did right there, you would then have to regress a single stage in the craft. And you'd have to repeat the second prefix part, right? So you'd get rid of that mod and you'd have to start over. Sorry, not start over, but go back a previous step. And so that's why I was saying if I hit lightning here, I would probably just sell it as is. Or I would exalt, whittle, then sell it like that. But yeah, if you don't end up hitting the lightning percentage, right? So let's say we're rolling. The possible mods that I would stop at, okay, there we hit tier 1 mana, right? As I said, in this situation here, you could either YOLO a null. You could just accept the fact that mana is a fine mod to keep and go for your final one. You could sell it as is. That's basically it. Those are your options. Right? So I really don't think mana is that bad of a mod. The market tends to look down on it, but I mean, 179 mana is not terrible. Especially like if you've already got another source of like flat fire somewhere to be able to get an ignite. You know, the marginal utility of something like that when you're not scaling into it past just being able to simply apply the ignite, or for like purposes of Trinity or something like that. It's not, there's not going to be a ton of scaling on that singular thing. Either way though, if you, yeah, so sorry, I'll put this in writing because this is probably pretty abstract. After you've got your 3 prefixes are equal guaranteed, right? So we've established at this point that we can get, if we go for either fire or lightning on the fracture, so fire / lightning on fracture equals 100%, right? And then we chaos for cold flat, which equals 100%. And then third prefix equals whittle. And then we can do that, stop at either fizz or third elemental flat. Elemental is better. If it hits T1 mana, a null or 50-50. If a null removes cold, go back to chaosing. If it removes the T1 mana, exalt and whittle until third flat. So that guarantees this is the step to get 3 T1 on any ring type, breach, penumbra, or dusk, right? As it pertains to a penumbra though, so where you have to factor in or a dusk where you have to factor in an additional modifier. After this stage here, so when you're going for the fourth total mod, the third mod that's changeable, here are the stopping scenarios. Okay. If T2 mana, keep, so it can block T1 mana, exalt and whittle again. If T1 mana, either YOLO annul, sell as is, keep and accept. Keep and accept being like just keep and accept that it's going to be one of the 5 mods. Right? If it hits T1 lightning, cold, or fire percentage, I would recommend selling, but if not, it will be a 50-50 to roll away versus your third prefix. If successful, continue as normal. If it fails, you will have to get third prefix again and remove a mod via there. And then, so these are the scenarios that you would stop at, right? So if you hit T2 mana, not stop, but like you'd go into the next step. T2 mana allows you to block it as we went over, and so you can exalt from there, and that'll help you get that fourth or your fifth prefix. So that'll be your fourth flat type. Stop scenarios for fourth prefix, aiming for fourth flat damage. T2 mana, you keep it, and then you exalt again, and then you keep whittling, right? Because that'll prevent T1 mana, at least until it gets rolled away. If you get T1 mana, either YOLO annul it, and you'll have a 1 in 3 to remove it, or you could sell it as it is, and then just start another base, or you could just keep it on there and exalt, and then keep whittling again, and just accept that you're going to be aiming for still quadruple flat, but mana is just sort of like the meh fifth prefix. Or if you get T1 flat, or sorry, T1 percentage, lightning, cold, or fire, I would recommend selling it at that stage. But if you're not going to sell it, if it's percentage lightning or cold, again, there's a better, a higher reason to continue with the craft, I suppose, than there is to sell it. But there's also probably going to be a higher market value at that stage for it if it has one of those. I would recommend selling here, but if not, you have a 50-50 to roll away versus your third prefix. So you would just use a whittling, and the whittling is either going to roll away, because your third prefix will always be either flat fizz or flat fire. So if you get a percentage lightning, cold, or fire, it's going to be that or the flat that rolls away. If you're successful at rolling away the percentage damage type, you just continue as normal until you either get one of these other scenarios or your fourth flat damage. You can, if you get the percentage damage, either sell it, do the 50-50, and if it's successful, you just continue as is. If it fails, then unfortunately, you'll have to go back to doing the third step over again, and you'll also have to remove a modifier, as it says. because when you go back to the previous step, right? So in this scenario, it would look something like this. So keep this less abstract, right? So let's say you had it like that, right? And so this mana was previously flat. Oh, sorry, it wouldn't look like this. It would be. Okay, so you have it like this, right? So you've got your triple flat, and then your fourth mod ends up being lightning. If you whittling and it picks, there we got rid of the what? Right one. Okay, there we go. That time it got rid of the third flat damage, right? In this scenario, you don't want to just keep whittling because you've got an extra, because you're back to your third prefix, right? And so if you have an additional modifier, it's very likely that that additional mod will end up being mana at some point, which would block your third one. And so you have to remove it with either you want to roll it away to a suffix, then remove it with a dextral and ill, and then you'll have to go back to getting the same process of getting your third prefix again. And so that's why I was saying if you end up in a situation where you hit one of these percentage damage types in the process of going for your fourth flat damage, I would either keep it or sell it or just start a new ring base over. And if you're very, very lucky, gentlemen, you'll end up with something like this to show you the different stages here. So you can see we started off, again, to summarize these things, we got a brick fracture like this. We 3-to-1'd it to get a clean base. We got either flat cold or flat lightning with 4 total modifiers, right? So we got it to 4 total mods. We started chaosing until we hit flat cold or lightning. We divined that flat roll to a high end one. We were successful on the fracture. If we weren't, we simply 3-to-1'd it and repeat until we were. We chaos orbed until we got T1 flat cold damage, right? And then we use an exalt, and then we we get the successful fracture, and then we exalt to get a second mod. We chaos orb that until we get T1 flat cold. We exalt again, and then we whittle that until that hits either T1 flat lightning, fire or fizz, whichever elemental what is missing, and then or fizz. And let's just say arbitrarily, let's just imagine that this was lightning in this scenario, that lightning was the max roll. We would then exalt, and we would stop if we hit tier 2 mana, and we would exalt again. If we hit tier 1 mana, we would either do one of the things I just laid out. If we hit a percentage damage, we would either sell it or we would 50-50 away. And we would do that until we get our 4th flat damage. And then from that point, if we were lucky, and let's say we did it with the mana strategy, because that's the most likely scenario in which it would be successful, like this. And then we, again, we got that as our 4th mod, so we put our 5th one on, and we start going for... we start going for the fizz. Let's say we succeeded, right? Let's say we get our quadruple flat fizz or quadruple flat tier 1 of the mods that we were looking for. Congrats, you've hit a mirror ring already. But we've got it like this, let's say, right? Then this is obviously going to probably apply to 0 or very few of you, but maybe someone gets lucky, so I'll be thorough enough, right? So let's say you've got the 4 max tier flat damages, and it was following a scenario where you had the item level, the tier 2 mana, right? Your next whittle is going to remove the mana. Again, Craft of Exile is broken, so for some reason this is not working on Craft of Exile, but that is exactly what would happen. Let's see, does it work on tier 3 mana? It does not. This probably has something to do with the crafting base type. Either way, though, at that point, this is very frustrating. I don't know why that's not working. But anyways, at that point, for your 5th prefix, it's really out of your hands, but I'd still be happy because you're, congrats, you've got a mirror ring. But there's only 5 scenarios there. You're either going to end up with T1 mana, you're going to end up with lightning percent, fire percent, cold percentage, or if you get lucky, T1 accuracy, and that I don't think that ring exists yet, but that would be like the perfect craft. If we take a look here, let's go for attacks. Let's see what the best penumbras are currently. And I can assure you that that will be the exact composition of every single one of them. Let's go to the mirror ring. All right, so this is the incorrect fracture. And you can see lightning damage percentage. But that's quad, though. This one is lightning percentage, good suffix, but it's only tier 2 fizz. And I'll just look at the ones that have the quadruple tier 1. So quadruple tier 1, fire damage percentage. As I said, you can see he has it listed for 2 mirrors. And instead of putting it up for mirror service, because it's fire percentage, but there's no way to proceed. As I said, you kind of get fucked if that happens. This one listed 28 minutes ago. Correct things, wrong fracture. And he has percentage lightning. Okay. Which I said, outside accuracy is the best one. That's probably second best. Okay, this guy's got the correct fracture. Correct item level. Oh, was this the correct item level? Nope. Wrong item level, wrong fracture. This person, I suspect, is... And his name is a bunch of numbers. I would be willing to stake everything I've ever owned that if I direct whisper, the name that would pop up would not be in English, put it that way. Okay, the character, not English, the character alphabet would not be the Latin alphabet. Okay, Maelstrom Knot, item level 77, correct item level, correct fracture, and you can see this is done correctly. This is crafted correctly, but again, he's got the lightning percentage there. This is the wrong item level and the wrong fracture. And you can see he got chaos damage. This is why you don't want that item level, because it'll fuck you in this way. Wrong fracture. That's Janubu. He doesn't even craft, but whatever. Yeah, cold damage, lightning damage. Wrong item level, wrong fracture. Dude, what? I don't know how you could make it more obvious that you're RMTing than to name your accounts just a random string of numbers. I care so little. There's so little pride of ownership here that despite transacting in items worth thousands and thousands of real world dollars, my account name is ABCDEFG. That's the most biggest dead giveaway. All right, Beast Band, wrong level, item level. Again, wrong fracture. Lightning damage, correct fracture, correct item level. This one, but oh nope. Tier 2 fizz damage, incorrect. Tier fucking 2, Janubu. Wrong item level, wrong fracture. Double tier 2 mods. Tier 2 mod. But this is all of the... This has a tier 2, but this is 100% perfect mods otherwise. This is probably the best one we've seen so far. Because you've got the fire, which is the correct mod. It's the correct item level. Cold was probably put first, and then the fizz, and then for his fourth one was going for lightning. So that's a tier 2 lightning, but then hit accuracy. Damn, this one's so close to being done. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, what do we have here? Lightning, that's correct. Correct item level. Correct. And then percentage. That this one with the accuracy, it's the first time we've seen one that has had close to, because like that's tier 1 dex. The triple tier 1, the lightning damage is tier 2, but that's only like 12 flat damage difference. And then the accurate, but the only one with accuracy. But you can see how all of these have like lightning damage percentage. Again, another lightning damage percentage, or they have cold damage percentage, or they have fire damage percentage, or there's a couple that have like the chaos damage percentage. That's just objectively incorrect. This one's the wrong item level, so that's probably why he stopped at this phase. Wrong item level. And this has got multiple tier 2s. Wrong item level. And this one's blocked by the mana. And it doesn't even have multiple tier 1s on it. Oh my god, this could not have been crafted more incorrectly. Why? His tier 2 is cold damage. Why? Which is why he has evasion there. Look, the reason why this guy is selling this, look. Tier 2 cold damage is item level 65. But the fucking evasion here, which is not even tier 1 evasion, by the way, is 66. And so the only thing it would roll away is the cold. Whereas, if he had T1 cold and then left these, oh, I've already gone over that. Oh man, it just hurts me looking through these, because these are the best items in the game for these rings, by the way. We only saw one of them that was crafted correctly, and it wasn't finished, right? It had the accuracy, it had the dex, which were both perfect in that scenario, but it had the tier 2 lightning. That's a pretty small difference on that one. I think that's actually the one similar to the one I have. But that's a bummer on that guy's part. I can't remember what that was selling for. But these are all these rings are mirror service, or they are like, what was the highest one? Like 4 mirrors, right? There it is. Oh wait, that is my ring. I had no idea. I didn't look at the names when I was going through. So that's the most Belton thing I've ever, the most Belton-y thing I've ever done. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I don't need to look there. There's my rig, by the way. I didn't realize that was the ring. I forgot that I put it because this is not. I have a mirror service tab right here. This is just in a fracture tab. I didn't realize I had put the thing on it. Sorry about that. But anyways, yeah, you can see here we've got the flat fire tier 9. As I said, it's either flat or lightning. Then you got the cold on there, right? And then we got fizz is the third one. But then you hit the lightning on the thing, and because it's tier 2, just decided rather than selling it at that point, just decided to see what the final mod is, and then got accuracy. And again, because the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 lightning is 12 flat damage, so instead of getting 71, it's 59. So that's not a very big difference. And then the accuracy, it's about 100 lower, but just the simple fact that you have accuracy instead of a percentage damage, like accuracy for Amazon is so much better. In particular, because the highest DPS setup you can have is threaded light with Crown of Eyes. Which if you have this jewel right here where I have it, this gives you 96 spirit, chest gives you 61 spirit, plus you get 100 base spirit, plus you get 65 spirit here. You end up getting like 600% increased damage from those two as like a global combo. And so and that applies to all percentages, right? So percentage of a specific element, with the exception of lightning, because like lightning spear, the secondary projectiles on it are 100% conversion. But I mean, that's not a single target skill anyways. You're rarely going to have 100% of a single damage type anyways. And so it's usually just for ailment's sake or for trinity's sake that you'll have these. And in that case, having percentage lightning, obviously there's a diminishing return on increased damage sources. But also if you're doing like 3 different types of damage, only having one person, like, you know, if you're, let's say 30% cold damage and 70% fizz, you know, getting percentage increased cold damage is not even 30%. It's only 30% of 30%, and it has a DR, so it's not that great. Accuracy obviously scales your attack speed, and if you're an Amazon, it gives you the crit, and it gives you the base if it's on a weapon too. So that's a much better mod. This is a really good ring. And the dexterity as a suffix with the accuracy is Chef's Kiss, because dexterity, of course, gives attack speed through the notable here. And it also does it indirectly through the fact that you get 5 accuracy per dex, flat accuracy. And furthermore, if you have Hawa gloves on, which I don't personally use, but if you do have Hawa, that also scales dex into attack speed too. And so by having, if you do have accuracy, if you're able to get 4 flat damage types and accuracy, I would 100% put dex as the suffix there for like congruity's sake. If not, I'd probably go with all res. If I didn't have accuracy, if I had a percentage damage, I'd probably go for all res, the suffix. But yeah, that is how you craft a triple breach ring or a quadruple flat breach ring. I know that was a major mouthful and a hell of a journey. This is almost a 2-hour video. I've had food sitting outside on my porch for probably an hour and a half now. Another classic Belton move. But those are the steps that you can go about by doing that, guys. In this case here, again, it's not a perfect, it's a perfect ring in terms of the mods on it, but there's the tier 2 on there, so not 100% perfect. As we just went through there, though, guys, you can see how many, these are the mirror crafted rings, right? And how many of those were made incorrectly, right? And I have, for reasons relating to my previous 2 videos, I'm not going to stay what the common denominator is amongst those crafts, but in any case, let's just say the common denominator that we can talk about is that they are crafted incorrectly, and but the item does not exist. So the you know, maybe somebody who sees this will finally hit the quote unquote perfect one. Be very difficult, definitely worthwhile endeavor, I think, and I'm sure there'll be a huge market for it. But again, for those of you who aren't mirror crafters, and I'm probably talking to an invisible audience for when I say those of you who are, but for those of you who aren't and have limited budgets, keep in mind at every stage of what we discussed today, there's an opportunity for profit, right? You can profit, as I just did, even in the middle of recording this. Holy cow, this guy wants a sacred flame. In the middle of recording this, by selling the 3-to-1 breach rings, as you saw, somebody bought my ring base for 15 divs. Third time that's happened today. You can get just the single tier 1 mod on here, and if you're risk averse and you don't want to fracture it, you could probably sell it unfractured. Let the person try to YOLO fracture it themselves. You can sell the fractured mod individually like this, just a single one. You can sell it with the tier 1 or with your tier 1 fracture and with the cold damage. You can sell it, and obviously on any other ring aside from the special 2, right? If you're on a breach ring, the next step after that would be the 3 T1 prefixes, and at that point you're talking hundreds and hundreds of divs, but that would require whittling crafting. But everything prior to that third prefix, though, you can do without having to spend any of the expensive omens. And so I think that especially this late into a league, that is broadly applicable information that could apply to pretty much any of you guys. As a last thing here, just because I know this is such a you know, information dense kind of stream today, why don't we try one more 3 to 66? That's within our range. That's within our range. Oh, this is another way. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. Here's another thing for breach rings. I wouldn't have put the suffix on this in the first place, but here's another way that you can go about getting breach rings. All right, you can buy them magic like this. A lot of the time when they're magic, people won't bother putting quality on them, right? And so because of that, if it has a low range roll and they just price check it by looking at this, right? If this says like 25 or 24, 22, you'll see ones that are like, you know, 5x, 10x, 20x, because they haven't put the quality onto it, and it's had such a low roll that it's going to overlap with a bunch of lower tier mods that do have quality on them. And then once you have it into this state as well, right, because it's magic, you can guarantee that you never have to do a YOLO annul or dextral annul, because obviously you just will stop at 4 mods. But also another cool thing you can do here, right, is instead of just regaling, get this one right here, sinestral coronation, which means your prefix is guaranteed, or your regal is guaranteed to be a prefix. That'll have a damage to be a second flat tier 1, right? And then for your third modifier, use a sinestral exaltation, which will also guarantee another prefix, which is another opportunity to get another flat tier 1. And that's better than the essences because these cost nothing. They're like an exalt each, right? And the essences, if you do attack, right? Attack can also add leeches, which are suffixes. And if you do lightning or fire or cold, it can add resistances as well as the flats. So it can add suffixes. And naturally, that's not that's going to give you 0 potential to hit a second tier 1. So aside from the fact that you're aside from the fact that you can get value out of simply looking for the magic ones because people overlook them often, due to not putting quality, or due to the fact that they just have a very low natural roll. You also get a save value in the sense that you can guarantee it'll go to 4 mods without any risk to the base or having to buy an expensive omen. And on top of that, you also get an opportunity twice over to add a prefix that could potentially be another tier 1. That is actually how I made this ring, and that's why I brought it out. Doing exactly what I just did there. I used the Regal, hit tier 1 accuracy, and then the Exalt hit tier 1 rarity. So this is actually triple tier 1 prefixes. There's a ring sale. Oh, what do you know? They're never offering. A faux nail, which one's faux nail? Can't let them win. But yeah, then I just exalted out the suffixes here. But that was actually the process of hitting triple tier 1 here. Tier 1 accuracy, tier 1 rarity, tier 1 lightning. And this is one of the ones I've been just actively using because I don't particularly care too much with the gear on my character at the moment. I didn't bother really changing the suffixes either. But that's triple tier 1s, right? And that came without any having to use omens whatsoever. That's obviously that's a pretty outlying scenario. That's not like it's commonplace, but If you're just going for the fracture, if you're starting a ring from scratch, and you know, you're at the stage where you just want to hit the fractured mod, there's no reason to not do that, right? Because if you do hit a second tier one with the Regal, or you do hit a second tier one with the Exalt, that just became a whole lot more valuable, and you don't even have to risk the fracture. Because if the fracture misses, as we just did here, and as we did as the previous one on the video, you know, the item is basically, it's not entirely worthless. Sometimes you can get like a couple divs for bricked ones on breach rigs, but it's more or less like zero value. You can see here, this is just a graveyard of T1 lightning, flat lightning rules, for that exact reason. But if you get the double tier one, even without the fracture, that'll have value because it's only one mod away from being finished. And also, if you don't, as I mentioned, using the essences, like to after that, like a greater essence, those are quite expensive. They're like half a div sometimes, and in half the time it's going to add a suffix anyways. And so you guarantee yourself the 3 prefixes. You guarantee that you'll get 2 additional tries for essentially for free, and it has 0 difference versus, you know, because you're always going to have 4 mods on there. If you're getting to a stage where it fractures, it's either you hit the fractured mod that you want, or it's a throwaway. So it doesn't really matter that the other 2 are prefixes. And if you do end up hitting something successful, then you can sell that for a major profit without ever having to fracture and risking that. So it's literally, it's a win-win on both ends. You don't have to use the annuls. So that's a more practical tip I can give you guys as well. But yeah, there's my 2-hour, fuck me, I am wordy. There is my 2-hour guide to crafting rings correctly. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you are new to the channel, let me know any feedback you guys have. It'd be great if you could sub, leave comments, all that kind of YouTube stuff. Obviously, it takes me a ton of time to record these, but that pales in the amount of time and effort and currency and forethought I put into, you know, planning them. And I know even in spite of that, they still end up being extremely long. But this video, for example, cost me about 1,200 divs, a couple days to prepare. And, you know, writing out things like that obviously has some time associated with it. So now that I've no longer been on Twitch, just from a practical perspective, I need to kind of get things rolling with YouTube a little bit more if I want to continue doing this. So if you want to help me in that pursuit, it'd be great if you guys could like, sub, and maybe share it if you think it'd be helpful for somebody. And let me know if any ideas that you guys want in the future. Hopefully this has led you on a path of discovery, or provided some information you didn't know. And if any of you guys end up pursuing this and want to share your crafts, please pop by anytime on our new YouTube live stream and feel free to link them to me. Or if you have any questions, drop them below and I'll be sure to answer in the comments. All right, guys, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed. May the odds ever be in your favor, and hopefully myself or one of you guys can get that perfect item, that perfect 6 tier 1 penumbra ring with accuracy before one of the unnamed people does. So I think that's a noble pursuit. Until next time, fellas, have a great day and good luck in the game. Talk to you soon. Cheers.